Welcome back to another episode of the Braun Performance Rehab Podcast. Joining me today is Dr. Roni Glassman. Roni and I are going to be discussing her journey with Rehab with Roni, which is her own physical therapy practice that we started. Roni and I are going to be going over pretty much everything as it relates to her clinic today, Rehab with Roni. So we're going over clinic space, what it looks like, how she equipped it, how she's growing it, how she set up her business structure, and so much more. Really great episode, and I really like what Roni is doing in Tennessee. I highly recommend you check her and her practice out. This episode, and every episode in season 5, is brought to you by ISOFIT. ISOFIT is my go-to for all things isometric strength training and can help you and your athletes win more and hurt less. For more on ISOFIT, you can check the description below. Enjoy. Roni, welcome to the podcast. I'm super excited to work with you today. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, for people who maybe they haven't heard about you and this new brand that you have, Rehab with Roni, would you mind filling them in a little bit about who you are and all the great things that you've been up to there in Tennessee?
Sure, yeah. So, as you just mentioned, I live here in Tennessee. I'm from outside of Atlanta, though. I graduated from physical therapy school a couple of years ago and created the Instagram handle Rehab with Roni while I was still working for a big corporate PT company, just to post some educational videos and get some good content out there. And then it just sort of snowballed into, well, maybe this should be the name of my LLC. Well, maybe I should open a clinic with this name. And so that's what I'm doing now. I am working for myself. I'm about 3 months into that, and I own my physical therapy business, but I operate out of a private room within a personal training gym in downtown Chattanooga.
That's awesome. So tell me a little bit about that, because you said corporate PT, and now you're kind of doing a very separate or different kind of setting by the sounds. So what sparked that transition and all?
I think the spark probably happened early on in my career. Well, I'll preface it by saying this. I never thought that I would be working for myself. That was never the long-term plan for me. But after working for about 6 months to maybe a year for a company that sort of mandates, what productivity needs to look like, what your schedule needs to look like, how much time you can have off, all of these things, I had this just like deep-seated feeling like I probably would be better suited doing something on my own. And so the transition from full-time for a big company to full-time on my own was a faster one than I had anticipated, but it started with me just seeing people on the side. And then as that grew and then my name kind of got out around town, I started to think it would be wise to maybe find a space that's not my upstairs guest room to treat people. Because, that's like a little, it was just a little, it was fine. It was fine. But I was like, I want more equipment. I want more space. And so, yep. So then I partnered with the gym end of last year. And then in April of this year, I was full-time in the gym.
That's awesome. That's awesome. What kind of led you to choose like a gym to partner with instead of like, I just think about outpatient PT clinics and the ones that I've seen that way. And the majority of them don't seem to have like gym equipment and squat racks. Is that still even considered like PT?
Yeah. So, well, I agree with you. I think most generic, like when you think PT clinic, you're not thinking squat rack. But I luckily was in a really sweet spot where the place that I was at for almost 2 years did have a squat rack, like the Rogue wall plated kind of setup. And we had a good amount of weight in there. And so that was really nice because I think it exposed me to a good population of people that are a little bit more fitness forward, and kind of incorporating that kind of weightlifting into their plan of care is feasible. They can do it. And so I've always been interested in weightlifting, weight training, fitness. And so then when I started to consider where I would best be set up and what would suit my patients best, I thought, well, gym would have everything that I need, and then some. And so it was a natural progression. It just made sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's such a great point. And it's one of those things too, I feel like I say it all the time, but when people think gym or fitness and physical therapy, they always think like athletic, like high school, college, high level athletes that way have to be the
Hmm.
ones there. And it's like, that's not always the case. We just talked about it with a guy named Jacob on the podcast recently. It's like, that term athleticism or athlete doesn't really have an age requirement. So,
Mm-mm.
anyone can realistically do quote unquote athletic things. Like there's not a age where it's like, okay, you can no longer jump ever again. You can no longer sprint ever again. Like anyone can do these things. It might take the right person and the right guidance and right progression to get them there if they haven't done it for a while, but they can do it. And not to mention the amount of times, you pull up a job description in today's day and age, and ability to lift 75 pounds, ability to lift 100 pounds is on almost all of them. And
Yes.
meanwhile, you walk into a lot of clinics and the heaviest weight they've got is a freaking 10-pound med ball. And it's like, I'm sorry, but even you doing 30, 40 reps of that doesn't really prove to me that you can safely handle 100 pounds, which is something you're going to be doing literally day in and day out.
Yes, I think a lot of clinics lack the proper stimulus. We're like chronically underloading people. And I think that's a pretty well-known fact at this point. And I don't know. I think hopefully in the future there will be a sort of shift and a change in mindset when it comes to, well, what do we equip this PT clinic with? And like I said, I think I came from a good spot where, I mean, the guy that opened that place was more adamant about, I want this kind of equipment because this is the kind of people that we're going to be seeing. And it does open up more avenues for you to be creative in the clinic too. Like with workers' comp patients, all the time I'm like, okay, now we're going to deadlift, we're going to squat, we're going to move this weight plate. It's good, but it's unfortunately not so common yet.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. What kind of equipment did you equip your own clinic with that way? What were the kind of things that you were like, look, this is what I need to get started right now in order to provide that like higher level of care, I guess I'll call it.
Sure, yeah. Well, I guess I should preface it by saying I guess you could say hit the jackpot because this was an already established gym and it's a private personal training gym. So think you walk into the space and there's a turf field and there's a common, gym area with the cage and all the kettlebells and everything you could think of. And then as you kind of go down the space on either side of the hallway, there's two rooms on each. And those are big enough rooms for at least a physical therapy table to be in, a squat rack, and a salt bike, a rack of weights, and then shelves and storage for other things that you might need, like bands, dry needling equipment, all those things. So it already came equipped with the weight things, and I just kind of brought in my more PT specific things, and it was pretty smooth sailing.
What kind of PT specific things? You said the needling in particular?
Yeah, dry needling. I don't cup that often, but my cupping set, um, patient paperwork, consent forms, and then whatever things I want to put in there to make it personalized in my own. But I have a cart with all my dry needling stuff and different tape and all the modality type things.
Oh my goodness. No, I think that's a great point. It's like, if you're going into an existing space that already has those things, you probably don't need to add much. It kind of creates a more lean startup. But I think from like the checklist side of things, like you can probably cover a lot of those things with a very tight budget, right? Like, assuming you've
Yes.
already checked your boxes on the manual side, the table, I don't know why people still feel the need to spend 2 or 3 grand on high-low tables.
I know.
Um, for
I
the
know.
amount of other tables I can buy at a fraction of the price, I just don't think it's worth it anymore.
I
Um,
agree. I agree. I think the one that I have in my clinic was actually a gift from my parents. They were like, we want you to have this table to keep treating people, and it gets the job done. I definitely think it could be a little more sturdy, but yeah, I don't need a fancy high-low table. Half the time we're barely on there. So
and it's interesting too, because you look at the cost of the high-low table and you look at the cost of the power rack, and the power rack is usually cheaper, and yet people are picking the high-low table almost every time.
that is such a good point. I've never thought about it like that, but yes, I mean the power rack is like a quarter of the cost, probably, maybe even less.
Yeah. So I think that, from an overall facility design standpoint, it's not that difficult to literally go in and build and equip a clinic with the kind of things that you need to load patients heavy and load them
Hmm.
heavy safely. It's not like we're getting like, the freaking budget version of the power rack here. It's like you can get pretty legit version of a power rack, of barbell, of some pretty significant weights. And, I like to think that having a few 100 pounds is probably enough for most people. You don't need to have like 1,000, 1,500 pounds of plates in your clinic right from the start. But I think some basic things like your table, any of the hands-on stuff that you want to do, a rack, a bar, some
A
plates,
mirror,
and then yes, a mirror is huge.
huge.
A bench of some sort, and then maybe some
A
kind of like
bench.
dumbbell, kettlebell, something like that.
Yep, that's pretty much, I mean, you just named everything that I have access to. So it is ideal. However, I will say, I think when people are planning on opening a clinic and we're talking more of the basic, what you'd consider physical therapy, like say you're getting a knee surgery and oh, my doctor's sending me to 12 visits of PT, they're not often considering the population of people that are going to be doing that type of training, because for the vast majority of patients that I saw, they weren't using that. I mean, I definitely got use out of it, but when I was working for the larger company, it was much more so an ankle weight is sufficient. So I see the other side. I see why people don't even think it's necessary to put that extra bill, but I still think that there's value in it. But it kind of depends on your demographic and where you're located.
It definitely does. That's such a great point. Is it depends on, who you want to work with. What is your ideal patient avatar? And I think that there's some people out there that feel like, oh, I want to treat everyone. And that's great, but like it's a lot harder to build a clinic space that has everything you need to treat pediatric population, like little
Yeah.
kids, and sports injuries, and older adults, and all these different populations that way, all in one space right from the start. I think that you can certainly branch out into everything. But I find a lot of times if we become too generalized in what we do, then we really don't get good outcomes with any one specific population. We get average outcomes. And I don't think anyone that's listened to the podcast for this long is really interested in average outcomes and being like everyone else. I think that there's something more, there's a drive. We want to be better. We want to stand out. We want to do things a little bit differently. And I think that you can certainly design a clinic space to really be, whatever niche population you want to work with. Like if you want pediatric sports, or if you want like older adult sports, or, anything in between, you can really kind of design your facility layout and equipment accordingly.
Yeah, I think that's 100% true. And then also when you design it the way that you envision they're going to want it to be, and to attract that population, then it's fun for the patient too. It's a good experience when they walk in and they're like, "Oh my gosh, you have all these weights, you have this rack, you've got the whole full gamut. This is awesome." It's a much more fun experience for them too.
Exactly. And it's like you put yourself in their shoes, and it's like, well, if I'm the person who just, lifts at the gym 6 days a week, I don't care if it's like bodybuilder, power lifter, whatever that way. If I go to the PT clinic and I don't see anything like what I use every single day in there,
You see an
I get a
ultrasound
little
machine and like
uneasy.
a 4 pound weight, you're like,
Do ultrasound machines even get use anymore?
They do sometimes when patients come in and they're like, "I need ultrasound." Not in my clinic, but in previous experiences, yes.
I was gonna say maybe I messed up then because I didn't equip our space with an ultrasound
How
unit.
dare
So
you? You're
I'll have
losing.
to
You're
get
losing on that.
I'll have to get right on that. My gosh.
Yeah.
Um, it's interesting that you bring that up too, because there are so many of these modality type things popping up all the time. Like I swear every week I'm getting a notification about a new modality type thing that just came out. And it just kind of baffles me how quick some clinics are to go all in on spending 30, 40, $50,000 on the shiny new toy when we don't really know what it even does, or if our patients are going to respond well to it yet. I mean, you kind of mentioned cupping, dry needling, and like some basic hands-on stuff. That way, is that kind of the extent of the modality care that you've equipped your clinic space with?
Yeah, and like I said, I really don't do cupping very often, just because if I think it's something soft tissue related that could be better addressed with a needle, I'm just probably going to go straight with dry needling because I've seen better outcomes with that than I have with cupping, with my own personal experience, me being patient, and then also with my patients.
Do you needle yourself a lot?
You know, sometimes I do, especially if it's like my forearm and I've had a heavy grip day at the gym. I'm like, let's just get in there. It's a little off-putting, but I do it.
That's fantastic. And it's interesting too, you bring up dry needling, because I've seen it be so effective for so many people in the past that way. And it just always baffles me how different each state is, where some states don't allow any kind of dry needling at all, and other states are like, you just have to provide sufficient training, and they never define what sufficient training is.
I
So
know.
it's one of those things where I feel like it is so effective, and I really want, people to have access to that as a treatment option. But it's also a matter of like, if you're in one of these states where you literally can't do it, it's like, how far do you have to travel to get that?
Right. That is one huge downfall, I think, of the PT industry. And I really hope one day we can all find some common ground and agree that it's a good intervention, it's quality, and we know what we're doing, and there are outcomes that, are favorable. So eventually one day I think we'll get there. We just have to get all the legislation on board.
One day at a time. So
Exactly.
hypothetically, say you've got that unlimited clinic budget, you win the lottery and you've got millions that you can dump into your clinic. What kind of things are you equipping your space with? Or are you staying on the more like lean side of, a clinic space, I guess I'll say?
Wow. No one's ever asked me that question. I like this. $1 million budget. Sky's the limit. Let's see. The first thing that comes to mind, this is like so silly, but windows all around. I want like a garage of all windows that will lift up when it's nice out. You know what I mean?
I
Um,
feel you.
yeah, I love the natural sunlight, but that's not really equipment, is it? I think it would kind of stay the way that it is. I don't think that you need much more than a place to run. So like a long enough turf field to really get some velocity, right? Kettlebells, barbell, weight plates. That that's what you need, and some solid PT tables that don't even really need to be high low.
Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
think that's the general gist of what you need. I think that there's a lot of other cool and trendy things that do fit the clinic space, but a lot of them are not the modalities like we mentioned earlier. Like, for example, I don't really plan on putting an Ultra G treadmill in my space.
Right.
Um, I just don't want to mess with that. I feel like it's a little bit of a hassle, but could we put force plates in? Could we
Force plates
put
would be
some different?
cool.
Yeah, like there's
That's
different
cool.
things that way that I think have a time and a place and can actually enhance our ability to do what we do. But, I think a lot of times we get so lost in the sauce of like, oh my gosh, this cool thing, that cool thing, when people are getting results and have gotten results with the same things for decades, longer than I've even been practicing. So, to a certain extent, I want those new things integrated in. But at the other side of the spectrum, I also have to recognize that I can still get decent results without them. In fact, I can get better than average results without every shiny toy and bell and whistle that exists that way. So it's
Right.
just kind of a matter of, I call it like a prioritization list, breaking down what you have in your clinic space on what is the most essential and what are the kind of things that's like, what, we can live without that.
Yes, exactly. And I also think a solid positive and not overdoing it with, all of the fancy schmancy bells and whistles is that you don't want patients to be under the notion that their recovery depends on it. Like I like to show them, oh, look, we did this in an open space with a 35-pound kettlebell, or like you did this with body weight, or whatever. But if you don't need X, Y, and Z in order to maximize your outcomes, you can do this with much less than you think you do. But
Yeah,
fancy stuff is always cool.
exactly. And I think on the notion of fancy stuff too, I am trying every time I have patients, like I want them to enjoy and fall in love with this process of getting back to the things that they want to do.
Hmm.
And we do that largely through exercise. So
Yep.
therefore they have to have a positive relationship with exercise. So after we wrap up, however long it takes, maybe it's an ACL rehab, it takes us 80 visits. Maybe it's just a quick little muscle strain and it's better in a month. Whatever it is, I want them to have some kind of understanding of exercise and things that they can do long term to, help care and provide for themselves that way. And I find a lot of value in using equipment that they either have access to, at a gym that way, like you mentioned, dumbbells, power rack, barbell, all that stuff is pretty commonplace in most gyms in today's day and age, or equipment that I can provide them pretty easily, right? So, we
Yeah.
started selling the CTM band out of the clinic that way because it's so easy for people to use, right? It's cost effective. I think it costs 35 or 40 bucks or something like that. So people can buy it pretty quick and easy. And it's
Hmm.
a really good and effective self-use tool that they can take anywhere with them. And it gets pretty good, soft tissue targeted outcomes pretty quickly. So it's like, there's a lot of little things like that that I feel like fit into that clinic space, equation that patients can actually take home, use on their own, and continue to use after PT, because ultimately this probably isn't the best business model, but I don't want patients for life. I want patients to get better and then not need to come back.
No, it's a good business model because you're helping them reach their goals. You're not trying to suck them into like the continuous wheel of I need therapy forever. And then they tell their friends or they tell their family members, and you just help more people that way. If you kept them for life, they would be like, yeah, I'm still doing it. It's not really working. And eventually the business would fail, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. And ultimately, I think this is another thing I see lost in a lot of the clinic spaces is a lot of, I think you mentioned it yourself earlier, a lot of places seem to be so focused on the dollar sign. How many people can we bring in and how much money can we make? And it's like, I feel like PT is not the profession if you want to be the billionaire.
Yes, I agree. I mean, I think everything can be traced back to money, right? Like that's why all businesses exist. And I I do think it's unfortunate the way that a lot of the outpatient clinics, the traditional outpatient clinics, that insurance model has kind of gone and changed over the past, 5, 6 years. But I get it. Like I get that every business needs to make money to pay their employees. And no, you're not going to be a millionaire by being a physical therapist, but you're going to have a very rewarding career. And it's worth it, right?
It definitely is. And it's one of those things, it's like the impact you can have on someone is something that's just absolutely intangible. And you get to do that day in and day out. And you brought up an interesting point on the insurance and, typical clinics and that sort of thing. What are you typically seeing in the average outpatient insurance-based clinic in today's day and age?
Well, I'll start. We'll reel it back a couple of years because before I got into physical therapy school, so this is like 2017, 2018, I worked as a patient services coordinator for a large PT company in Georgia. And so basically I was, other than manning the front desk, I was, verifying insurance benefits and creating NPIs and doing all these things and getting authorizations. Anyway, all that to say, I remember back then there were maybe 2 or 3 insurance carriers. All of them were federal payers that required authorization for visits. So meaning patient comes in, that we say they need 10 or they need 12 or whatever, and we have to ask the insurance company. And I don't know if you need me explaining this or not. You probably don't. But now, so if back then it was maybe 2 or 3 companies that required auth, fast forward to 2024, right before I left the big company, the job that I was at, I was having every week a new commercial insurance, so non-federal paying insurance company requiring authorization. So that's like your Blue Cross, your Aetna, United Healthcare, all of these companies saying, "Oh, sorry, we require authorization now. We need extra documentation. We're going to say yes or no whether or not you get care." And so that was a very disheartening change that I started to see, and it was kind of rapid. I mean, I think it's changed a lot like in the past 1 or 2 years. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that's interesting too, right? Because people pay hundreds, if not thousands a month for access to health insurance.
Right.
And then they get told by their doctor that they should go and do physical therapy for so many visits. And then they get told by their physical therapist they need to do physical therapy for so many visits. And most of the time, that physical therapist is a doctor. And then that process gets shut down by their health insurance company, which they're paying hundreds, if not thousands of dollars a month for. And on top of that, a lot of patients have a copay or a deductible, and a lot of times most of the
Yeah.
bill is being fronted by the patient already in most
Yeah. Or they
cases.
get a surprise bill, like you collect a certain amount in the beginning, and then at the end of the month, they come back and they're like, look at how much my insurance didn't cover. What are we going to do about this? And you're like, well, that is the nature of the insurance game, unfortunately.
Why do you think we've gotten into this situation, in your opinion? How did we get here?
That's a good question. I think it all comes back down to money. Insurances, just like any other businesses, want to save money and cut costs where they can. And unfortunately, I just don't think they see the value in what we do and the outcomes that we can get. And so they've taken some cuts.
And that's such an interesting point, is they haven't seen the outcomes we can get.
I could go deep into that hole. We could talk about patient motivation and what kind of population are you seeing and how many people are you seeing per hour. I mean, that could go on. But I do think, in an effort to combat the fact that maybe insurance companies are under the impression that we're not making good outcomes and we're not making a difference. I know, as in my own practice, this was before I even went off on my own. Just as a PT working for a lot of people, I made sure to be really strategic about, okay, let's measure your progress not every 2 weeks. Let's measure it every time I see you. And let's take this outcome measure survey again. And we're going to go over it again. And instead of just having you take it and then putting it to the wayside and not even looking at it, I'm going to look at the questions that you answered and say, okay, well, it looks like you're still having trouble with this, and this. Like, let's go over that. And being a little bit more intentional when you have the time to really see, are they seeing the progress? Because while I could objectively be measuring lots of progress, if they don't believe that they are, then that patient goes back to the doctor and they say, I need surgery or whatever it is. So being a little bit more diligent as a PT about, like, being with the patient throughout the recovery process and showing them that they are getting better, 99% of the time.
I think this is where that one-on-one treatment model absolutely shines, right? Because now
Yep.
all of a sudden you have that time to spend with the patient. You have that time to take those additional measurements or actually dive a little deeper into conversation. I love, when my patients start doing their warm-ups, I kind of have that time as like conversation time of like, hey, tell me about, things from, today till the last time I saw you. What did we feel? What did we do? Just walk me through that process. And the more I can understand, how they felt and what they're going through, the better I can provide for them in that session. But also it kind of strengthens that relationship between myself and the patient, because, the better you build trust and rapport with your patients, the better they're going to do, in my opinion. And a lot of
Yes.
times I think going that extra step and even just asking someone simple as like, how was their weekend? What did they do? Goes such a long way. And I know
Yes.
there's no like research study that shows like, the importance of like subjective reports and, establishing rapport with patients and patient outcome. At least I don't think there's one. But I think that is probably the most essential clinical element, right along there with overall, practitioner skill, just being able to treat people as people and provide for them as individuals instead of looking at just another number on your schedule.
Yes. It's creating that therapeutic alliance, as we like to call it. But I think that that's so valuable. And to your point, I think whether or not there's research to support it, when people are able to tell that you're invested in their story and what's happening with them, they're like more likely to do their exercises too, because they know that you're going to ask. I'm going to be like, hey, how did the week go? Tell me how these exercises were. I'm going to grill you, and that I care and I want you to get better. And I know you want to get better too. And it does help. I think, it forms a good bond and keeps people accountable much, much better when you have the opportunity to be one-on-one. I tried it and I think I was relatively successful when I was working my other job, but it's pretty solid when you're one-on-one.
It is. And, as you mentioned, you weren't always in the situation you're in now, but you've proven to, literally the whole PT world that it's possible to, kind of break free, so to speak, start your own thing and become successful with it pretty, I'm sure you put in a lot of work, but like this process does not seem too difficult. Like it's not like impossible. No one can ever do it again, that sort of thing.
100%. It's completely doable. And that is something I kind of want to get into a little bit more on my ever growing platform on Instagram, at least, like just being able to be a resource for people, physical therapy students and new PTs alike, just because they all have similar questions. Like, how did you do this? How can I get here? I want to do what you're doing. And I'm like, you can 100% you can. You just have to have some drive and have more drive after that, but keep doing it.
Exactly. Because, the situation we just talked about a few minutes ago, it's like, it creates a situation where patients are frustrated, but PTs are frustrated too, because it's like, it sucks going into work and patients aren't getting better. It sucks going into work and having to write 30 notes a day. And I feel like a lot of PTs can relate to that. But just because you're in a sucky situation doesn't mean you have to stay there.
Yeah, just because it's the norm and it's what that's all you ever figured you would work at in terms of settings doesn't mean that things can't change. Because like I said, when I graduated physical therapy school, I was like, I just want to get a job. I can't wait. I'm so excited. And I was stoked. And it worked for a while before I realized I can do more than this. I can do better work in my community. And I can also have a little bit more freedom of my time. I mean, the concept of having to ask somebody for time off, I never really like considered it until I was requesting PTO and they were saying yes or no. And I was like, hold on, I get one life. You're telling me I don't get to do what I want to do? That I realized very fast and quickly that I don't like people telling me what to do. I like to tell myself what to do. So it is rewarding to do that.
Oh my goodness. I love that. And I guess I'll bring it up. I guess that's why we decided not to go the insurance route as well, because we don't like people telling us what to do.
Yes. And yeah, you can treat for as many visits as you want when you're not insurance based. So it is nice.
Yeah. And there's always a little bit of variability that way, like I'm licensed in 3 different states and I'm pretty sure the direct access in all 3 states is a little bit different.
Right. I say as many as you want. It does
right.
come with whatever your state practice act is, but
right. But the other piece to that as well is like I have certifications beyond just being a physical therapist. So just because I have my physical therapy hat on most of the time doesn't mean we can't get to that point where it's like, hey, you know what? You don't need PT anymore, but if you want continued strength and conditioning or continued PT service, or like PT being like personal training in this case, other things that way, like there's a conversation to be had there, and it's separate from skilled care. And I think that separation comes from, you're not as hands-on, so to speak, one, and two, when PT hat is on, it's medical healthcare provider mode. When
right.
strength and conditioning or trainer hat is on, it's, hey, look, we've got to get moving. We've got to get faster. We've got to get stronger. We've got to work on something. But that same medical lens that we look through is a little bit different.
That must be kind of difficult to switch back and forth, I imagine.
You see, you think, but in my opinion, the lines should be pretty great to begin with, right? We just established throughout this whole episode that PT clinics can have power recs, and that's still, skilled care. Well, not to mention, strength and conditioning, personal trainers, they use power recs all the time. So I want those lines, in my opinion. I think they should be pretty gray and pretty blurry. And,
That's
in
true.
fact, I think that there's been times where, there's strength coaches I really trust with that return to play process or the end stage rehab process where it's like, hey, insurance might not cover this, but you've got a great strength coach to work with who understands the progression of, hey, they're cleared to go back to sport. They're cleared by their doctor. They're cleared by their PT. Now I have to take them from that and actually get them back to the level that they want to be at.
Yeah, I agree. I think the line is a little bit gray. I'm just thinking of my patient this morning. One of my guys was like bilateral hamstring tear and essentially no manual therapy whatsoever. Just at this point in his recovery, we're outside of the gym and he's doing sprints in the street. And I'm like, this is PT, this is cool, but it's also training,
Right. And I mean, there's literally, we had Katie Dabrowski on the podcast in the past, and I don't remember if it's her course or whose course it is, but she always plugs this thing called training equals healthcare. It's like, why doesn't everyone think like that?
That's a great motto. I like that.
I do as well. So just to kind of wrap up here, what is next on the agenda for Rehab with Roni? Tell me about the clinic. Tell me more about the social media. Tell me what the future looks like for you.
The future is bright, my friend. No, I'm just kidding. Well, for the clinic right now, it's just prioritizing patients, building up to a full schedule. I'm still maybe halfway there right now, and that's been fun. The marketing side of things and just getting my name out there is exciting. I like doing it. I'm like, should I have gone into sales? I'm having too much fun here. But anyway, so the clinic side of things, just continuing this great relationship that I have with the gym that I'm in and getting my name out there and having fun and just being a physical therapist, because that's what I love to do. The online presence, like we had mentioned earlier, is kind of rapidly increased in a really fun way, which I wasn't expecting. And so I've started to take on some virtual clients, whether that be mentorship for people that are thinking of doing the same thing as me, because, while it seems like I just kind of showed up at the gym, there was a lot of things that kind of led me to be there and lots of more meticulous steps you have to take. So mentorship, and I've been doing some online, just virtual PT sessions also. And I don't know, I like doing stuff like this. I like doing podcasts, and I like being an educational resource. I think when I was early on in my career, and I still am, but I realized I love treating, but my favorite part of treating is being able to educate people, because I think when you leave PT and you discharge, knowledge is power, and the more you know, the better that you're going to be in the future. So if I can use my platform to further that, that's going to be fun, because I really like to share the word.
You've brought up the social media a few times, and I think that's such an interesting point, because I've had some students in the past or worked with some PTs in the past that are like, yeah, you know what? I just want to blow up on social media. I want to go viral. It's like, great, do it. Like, I think from what I've seen, you just kind of post consistently, and you post consistently good, accurate, insightful content. And if you do that, it kind of, over time gets you to where you are today.
Yeah, 100%. I literally said this yesterday. I was on a podcast. It was my first one, actually. This is my second one ever. Yay. And he asked me about the social media. I was like, dude, consistency is key. That's the name of the game. And also post stuff that you would actually want to watch yourself. Like, don't post stuff that you think is going to do well, or things you think are trending right now. Post things that you think are insightful or worth watching, because people are going to think so too if you think so, more likely than not.
Exactly. That explains why my dancing career on TikTok was so short-lived.
Wait, did you make a dancing video?
There's a couple out there that my patients requested I do with them. And it
Oh my
further
gosh, I need to see.
further proved that I cannot dance whatsoever. So I definitely need to find a way to get dance lessons for some of these little trendy dances from people, because it's bad. It's
TikTok has a
ridiculously
way
bad.
of taking people out of the weeds, out of the woodwork, and making them dance. The people that have never danced before. So, you're not alone.
Yeah. I like to make the claim that I was, a little too sober when we were dancing. And if you want the real dancing, you'll have to catch me at like a wedding or something like that.
Yeah,
After
a couple tequila shots in.
something like that. But yeah, no, I think that you're in such an exciting point, and I'm really excited to see where you go as a clinician, but also the impact that you have on, the broader scope of the profession, on the people around you, and so on that way. Because I think it's the kind of thing where, you start pursuing what you're passionate about or what you love to do, and you start to have like a ripple or domino.
Welcome back to another episode of the Braun Performance Rehab Podcast. Joining me today is Dr. Roni Glassman. Roni and I are going to be discussing her journey with Rehab with Roni, which is her own physical therapy practice that we started. So we're going over equipment that we're going over how she went about equipping her clinic and finding her location, how she developed the out-of-network model and how she went about growing and scaling that today. Ronnie and I are going to be going over pretty much everything as it relates to her clinic today, Rehab with Roni. So we're going over clinic space, what it looks like, how she equipped it, how she's growing it, how she set up the entire business structure how she set up her business structure, and so much more. Really great episode, and I really like what Roni is doing in Tennessee. I highly recommend you check her and her practice out. This episode and every episode in season 5 is brought to you by ISOFIT. ISOFIT is my go-to for all things isometric strength training and can help you and your athletes win more and hurt less. More on ISOFIT, you can check the description below. Enjoy.
No effect lifting other people up around you as you go.
Yes, and that makes me think of this kind of concept I've been thinking on recently, where if you're trying something new, for example, opening a PT clinic and going off on your own, the vast majority of people around you that care about you are going to be there and support you. And so it might seem scary or daunting or like, oh, what are people going to think? But number one, who cares? And number two, most people, they want to help you. They want to support you and do what they can to see you succeed. And so I mean, this podcast is a testament to that. Like, thank you for having me on and just kind of spreading the word of Rehab with Roni.
For sure. For people who want to find out more about you, Roni, where can they find you at?
The name is about the same. It's just Rehab with Roni, all one word, RONI. Comes from the name Veronica. And same with my website. If anybody wants mentoring or virtual sessions or in person, if you're in Tennessee, it's rehabwithroni.com.
That's awesome. We'll link to all of that in the description below. That way, if you didn't quite catch it, you can just click there. Roni, is there anything that we missed as we were covering today? I feel like we discussed so many different topics.
I know. I kind of feel like it was a whirlwind, but it was all fun and it was all important things that needed discussing. So I think we covered all our bases.
That's awesome. Well, I really appreciate your time and I really appreciate you being on here. I'm looking forward to working with you again in the future. Thank you so much for everything and best of luck with everything that you're doing.
Thank you so much.